Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. I'm drinking the best coffee. Sissy loves the coffee that I get.
He has milk with a splash of coffee.
Now somebody's going to be like, he was drinking the same coffee like a month ago and wearing the same outfit because this is sabbatical episode.
Yes.
So, yes, Isaac's been drinking the same coffee for multiple episodes
For
now.
3 months. And no, so Barry's obviously joining us today, kind of in the past, but in the future, back to the future.
Yeah.
However
We're
we want to
just
say that.
Messing with the space-time continuum.
That's right.
Barry's still on sabbatical, enjoying some time away from us, and he was really excited to just not be around Sissy and myself for 3 months.
Right.
And yeah, but you're here.
No, we're pre-recording, Isaac.
We're pre-recording this before his trip. So today's a mailbag episode, and you guys graciously submitted so many questions back when we asked for you guys to submit questions. And so this episode is going to be a little bit different than a normal week, to where typical week, we hit one subject and kind of dive into that. This week, we're going to answer 5 or 6 questions, some fun, some serious, and try to hit some different topics. So first one, let's just go ahead and lean into it because we were talking about it before we hit record. I mean, I'm so excited to hear you talk about angels and free will, both of you.
Oh, boy.
We had a question submitted. Really, somebody just commented. So it's a question from their son. It said, my son asked me, do angels have free will? Sissy, can you go first?
I'll kick us off.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe start with the definition of free will. So free will is being able to make your own choices without being forced to or without any sort of coercion. And so angels are spiritual beings. They have emotions and intelligence and a will. And in Scripture, we see that Satan was an angel who rebelled against God and then was cast out along with other angels because of their rebellion and because of their decision to not follow God, to their choice to sin. But Scripture does call angels holy. So anything that's holy is sinless, faultless. And so I think what we could understand from there is that angels do have free will, and yet they do not choose to sin. They are God's holy messengers. They are their purpose is to do the will of God, to obey His commandments, and that's what they're carrying out. So that's a little bit how I describe it.
Good. Yeah. So what we were talking about beforehand is
Here comes Dr.
Well,
Jones.
there's an interesting, I think, parallel or analogy that maybe helps us think about the angel question, but also helps us to think about our past, our present, and our future as people with regard to this whole idea of freedom or free will. And so Augustine would talk about the idea that human beings before the fall, so Adam and Eve, right prior to the fall, had what he called the posse peccare, the ability to sin. Mm-hmm. They had the posse non peccare, the ability not to sin. Mm-hmm. And they had libertas, liberty, freedom, right? So ability to sin, but also the ability not to sin, and then freedom. And they used that freedom to go their own way, to rebel against God, to enter into sin. And that because of that, sin changes things, right?
Yeah.
So post-fall, the reality for all human beings is the ability to sin, posse peccare, the non-posse, non-peccare, the inability not to sin, right? Because of our fallen condition, apart from Christ, we have the ability to sin and the inability not to sin. So we still have libertas, but Augustine would talk about that liberty, that freedom as vain liberty, as corrupted liberty. So our liberty, our freedom, was always used to sin. Then Christ comes into our life, and we have transformation, so that now we have the posse peccare, the ability to sin, and once again we have restored to us the posse non peccare, the ability not to sin, and we have now true freedom. He would talk about this true liberty in Christ, and empowered by the Holy Spirit. So now we have the ability to choose holiness, but we still have the ability to choose sin. And in this life, we go back and forth between those two realities. But then with regard to our future, when we are with Christ, when we see him as he is, when we have been glorified, transformed, when the presence of the Holy Spirit is something that we fully inhabit, the presence of God we fully inhabit eternally, that we will have then the non-posse peccare, the inability to sin. We have been so transformed that we will live in holiness while still maintaining libertas, still having freedom, that in this transformed condition and in the fullness of God's presence, we will still have freedom, but the inability to sin. And so I thought about that little way of thinking about it as it relates to this question about angels who, an unfallen angel lives fully in the presence of God and has not experienced the corruption of sin that we have experienced, but still has freedom, still has free will.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
There you go.
You were debating on before this if you should go fully into it. That was awesome stuff. Yeah.
That was good.
Well, you guys tease me for my Latin, so.
I mean, I didn't
like the Latin.
I didn't understand half of what you said. But I mean, it sounded really,
I'll
really
never
cool.
forget one time I was writing a Latin phrase up on the board in class, and one of my friends who was also my student, I had that dynamic a lot, and so he was sitting back there and he just started laughing. And I turned in and looked at him. I was like, Josh, what are you laughing about? He's like, I just think you make that stuff up. So, and some of it maybe from time to time.
Right.
Yeah.
You could write
Here's a good Latin phrase.
Yeah, you could write anything
I
on that
love a
board,
good
and
Latin phrase.
everybody's writing it down in their notes, and like, you're just messing with people right now. But okay, let's ask this question: who is a Christian leader that you think is doing good things?
So the first person that I feel like I've talked about her twice.
I wrote Beth Moore on mine too.
That's
so.
who I
love
wrote.
it.
But
Yeah.
this one, I just finished her autobiography maybe a few weeks ago. But two, and so even reading that was just helpful for me to even hear in her own words her journey. But one, she's a phenomenal Bible teacher. But that aside, I think the way she has stood for her convictions has been really, I really admire that, because it has come at a cost to her, and I'm sure a personal cost, but even a financial cost, where she has stood up for justice for women, for the abused, and even going to the extent of making a really difficult decision to leave the denomination that she has grown up in, served, loved, has all these personal connections, and yet was willing to say, I've got to take a stand here, and it's going to cost me something, and that's still worth it to me. So I just admire her for that.
Yeah, good. You know, I've really been watching closely and following Dr. Derwin Gray.
Yeah.
Who is a pastor at Transformation Church and an author, has written a number of books. I recently read his book, How to Heal Our Racial Divide, and it's just fantastic biblical theology addressing issues of race and ethnicity that are so contentious and divisive in our world. And so he's somebody who's just really doing some great work that I've really enjoyed, really admired. I recently read, I think I referenced it on our podcast about women in ministry, Dr. Nijay Gupta, who's a faculty member at Northern Seminary. And I finished that book since we talked about and we filmed that episode. And just a fantastic book. About,
I just got this book in the mail.
About seeing women in leadership in the early church. And so I'm just grateful for a scholar like that who's doing work that is so accessible while still also being really deep in its research, contributing to important questions that we're dealing with in the church. And then I think about John Mark Comer, who's an author, written several books, and not that long ago stepped away from full-time pastoral leadership really to create discipleship resources for the church. And you guys have heard me talk about my love for Dallas Willard and that I'm kind of immersed in some of the writings of Dallas Willard right now. I feel like John Mark Comer is one who is, for his generation, kind of articulating the theology of Dallas Willard, who's really articulating the discipleship in the way of Jesus. But John Mark has this way of making this really rich, deep teaching about spiritual formation really accessible. And so those are a few of the folks that I'm particularly watching these days.
Yeah, those are all good.
Yeah, I had Beth Moore for a lot of the same reasons that Sissy had talked about. I also put Christine Kane on my list, not just because she's a dynamic speaker and I love a lot of her messages, but just what she does with the A21 campaign and the whole organization, human trafficking. I've just admired her from afar for so long. Literally one of my favorite preachers there are in the world, but just her dedication to that ministry of A21 and what they do around the globe it's really, really cool. Okay, let's do this question. Somebody submitted a question that says, what do you think will look the most different about the church, not necessarily IBC, in 5 to 10 years? I geek out about all these things. So there's like 5 different things that you can answer on, but I'm curious what you guys will say.
So I think with Gen Z, and I think after that is Generation Alpha coming of age in the next 5 to 10 years, I think one of the things that is going to happen is we're going to be more the church is going to be more focused on serving and more outward focused. So serving and engaging people through serving the community, being a space where people can connect with others in that way. And that, I think, will be the thing that's going to drive attendance. So rather than, oftentimes we think of church as this place where it's more consumeristic, where I come and it's what I can get. I think when maybe this is hopeful in a sense, but I think it's going to become more about, no, I want to be part of this community because of the ways that they're serving others. I also think America in general, our country is going to become more diverse, and just population demographics tell us that. I think that's going to impact the church. And diverse in terms of ethnicity, but also I think there's going to be a lot more generational diversity. People are living longer. And so I think that's going to cause us to think about different ways, practices, in how we do church. Yeah. So there's a couple of things.
Yeah. There are 2 really important distinctives of who we are becoming at Irving Bible Church that I think my hope is that 10 years down the road is more normalized in the church in North America.
That's good.
We're a church that is committed to women in leadership. And we did a whole episode talking about the role of women in ministry. And, my hope is 10 years down the road, that has become a more normalized reality, something that is being embraced and championed by a lot more churches in North America. The other thing that is a distinctive of IBC is that we are becoming more and more a more fully multi-ethnic church. And just recognizing the reality that this is something that is near to the heart of God on the pages of the Bible. This is something that is really important for our cultural moment. And I think even as it relates to the next generation, Gen Z is the most diverse generation in American history. And so much of that generation's lives are very integrated with regard to race and ethnicity, that people go to school together and work together and do life together apart from kind of some of those tendencies to division along lines of race and ethnicity. But then if you come into the church and if the rest of your life is so integrated and you come into the church and it still feels segregated, that I think more and more the younger generation are going to see that not just as odd, but as deeply suspicious. And that the credibility of our gospel witness is actually connected to how we can learn to engage together in Christian community despite our differences. And so that's something that we have really been very intentional about pursuing as a church at IBC. And my hope is, when you talk about 10 years down the road, that's become now much more just sort of the normal experience within the life of the church.
Yeah, that's good.
Are we going to have a Barry avatar for the VR church in 5 to 10 years? No, I was trying to think of which one I'd land on for this. And one, I think the hybrid church is here to stay. I do think post-COVID that we're going to see that for a while. That, I mean, we talk about all the time about the online church of, hey, like the door's open now more than ever after COVID. That, and I think we're going to do like full episodes on online church and moving forward. But I'll say this, and maybe obviously we can disagree on this, and Barry might need to close his ears on this one. The decline of the sermon on a Sunday morning, of that being the main, kind of going to Sissy's point, as that being the main thing for why people like are involved or go to a church. That I think now more than ever, we like, you can get really awesome sermons on YouTube and all these places that you can go out and find like people, but what you can't find is that community. What you can't find is that closeness of what can, and I put on there, is of people being involved in churches, people seeking out churches for what they're doing in the community and what the community that they're creating, more than a dynamic speaker. And I think you're obviously gonna have the outliers of that, but I think that has been in the past, I feel like that's been a more of a bigger thing for why people choose a church, is because of the Sunday morning, 30 minutes, the dynamic message of that.
Do you think the cameras can pick up the angry eyes that the two preachers on the little sofa are giving to him? And like, are you kidding me right now? Are you kidding? No, I'm just playing. I hear what you're saying.
And I think, we talked previously about the credibility crisis of the church. I mean, and social media and everything, people are I think, more skeptical now of the celebrity pastor, that is the face of the church, that's the dynamic messages and all of that I don't know if it's going to, in 5 to 10 years, have the same pull that it's had in the past to pull people in as strong and keep people at our church. I would
not disagree with anything you said, other than to nuance it differently, of like, I suspect, and in some ways hope, that 5-10 years down the road, what you're finding is actually people drawn into the life of the church because it's what's happening here in this place with these people, which includes that sense of community, belonging, that you can't replicate in all the great content that's out there, but also recognizing that even what happens in that sermon on a Sunday is for this time, for this place, for these people. And I think that's certainly something that we try to keep in mind, in our preaching to the people of IBC, is like, I'm not preaching to try to gain an audience outside. I'm trying to speak to these people at this time, in this place, and for us to encounter God together in the scriptures, rather than sort of just kind of content creation, if you will, or a larger kind of platform.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is like, I don't disagree with you, and yet I do think there is a place for that sermon, because that sermon is for the people in that room. Right? You know what's going on, the stories, what people are going through. I mean, when I know you do this, when we're thinking through a sermon, I have faces of people in our congregation in front of me. I know who's going through what, and that. How are they feeling? How is this going to resonate with them? What do they need to hear that's going to give them hope in Jesus?
Now, when you were saying earlier about, are we going to have an avatar for Barry, I thought you were getting at 10 years from now, I'll be so old it will just replace me.
No. Well, speaking of that, what's one current fashion trend that you just don't understand? Barry, can you name a fashion trend?
Thank you, Isaac. Jerk. I've given him love before for his shoe game, but I don't understand his shoe game at all.
I got one.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the first one that came to my mind is Crocs. I don't understand Crocs. Like, I think the only reason you should wear Crocs is if you're like going out in the garden and something like that.
Yeah.
I don't, and I know everyone wears them. I just don't understand.
The little charms,
the
gibbets.
the gibbets and all that. Yeah, beyond me.
Yeah.
Crocs.
Jeans these days, I don't know what to do with my own jeans. And if I'm like hopelessly behind in my jean choices, but the jean choices that seem to be of the day, just, I don't know. I mean, my young adult sons are wearing very, Well, let's just say jeans that I don't think that I'm going to be wearing anytime soon.
I'm with you on that. You're like, I'm
And I just feel as though I shouldn't even comment on women's jeans,
No.
so I'm going to stay away from that one.
I will say the bell bottoms like kind of coming back.
Yeah,
and like
totally are.
Even like the oversized, like we sound really old, but we watch American Idol, and Barb and I at home we love American Idol, and somebody performed the other day, like he's like 20, and he had this massive pair of pants on. There's just like, I guess just the oversized stuff, and Barb and I talk a lot about the crop top. The amount of times Barb will say, I love this shirt, but does it have to be a crop top? Can it just be a little bit like longer? Why does everything have to be a crop top in today's? Anyway, there you go.
This is not what you expect from the Foreign Podcast.
No. People don't tune
Crop
in
tops
for our
crop tops, bell bottoms,
fashion
jeans,
trends and advice.
Crocs. So, okay, let's do this one. Somebody says, part of our vision here at IBC is to become a multi-ethnic movement. Which churches have we seen model this well, or are we in uncharted territory?
So let me start with this. I think in many ways we are in uncharted territory. And by that I mean there isn't this playbook. Here are the 3 things you could do, or here's a 5-year plan and you will become a multi-ethnic church. So I don't think that exists. And yet, while I say that, at the same time, this is at the heart of the gospel. This is at the very heart of the Great Commission. This is what we see the early church do. So I think both of those things are true. And I don't know of a whole lot of churches that are doing this in the U.S., and the couple that I think of, one is New Life in Queens, New York. The pastor is Rich Verlotis, and they are a community of, I think they have people from over 75 nations represented in their congregation. And part of their vision and their values, they're real explicit on, we want to be a multi-ethnic church that is deeply following Jesus for the sake of the world. So even some similar language to what we use. So that might be one. And then the other one I think of is you talked about Derwin Gray, his Transformation Church, and very similarly, where I don't think a whole lot of churches are so that this is such part of their distinctives that they're putting it in their vision language. I think to do something like that takes a lot of courage, and I think that's where when we went to that, it's kind of what we experienced as well. So those were just 2 I thought of.
Yeah. So, and in some ways, I think what makes our journey unique is the attempt to sort of experience a transformation as a church from what we have been historically to what we feel like God's calling us to become, from a predominantly white church historically to more and more a multi-ethnic church, in part precisely because the place that God has put us and the fact that we are here in one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the country. And so that requires an intentionality. And there aren't a lot of churches that we can look to that are ahead of us in this regard in terms of that transformation. I do think we have some incredible examples of churches that this has been a part of who they set out to be from the very beginning. You mentioned a couple of my favorites. I will mention one that's one of my favorites that's much closer to home, and that is the Well Church of Keller. And at some point while I'm out on sabbatical, I hope that you guys will have an opportunity to spend some time talking with Trey Grant, who's the pastor of that church. I know he's going to be here while I'm out on sabbatical preaching at IBC. And so Trey was our middle school pastor here at the church. And then we sent him. He spent a year working closely with me in a residency program. And then we sent him to go plant the Well Church in Keller. And he planted as an intentionally multi-ethnic church from the very beginning. And so it's been such a joy to me to watch his intentionality in his leadership of that congregation. And so for somebody who's been both a friend, a colleague, and in some sense a protege of mine, to become somebody who's now mentoring me in terms of what it looks like, what it means to lead a multi-ethnic church. Trey is somebody that I have just a ton of respect, admiration for, have learned a lot from.
I'll tell you something that was really encouraging for me was we went to as a church staff, went to the Mosaics conference here in Dallas, and just Mark DeMoss, and just to hear the churches there that are in a similar boat, that's pursuing a similar thing, the amount of churches, because Yeah, it is difficult, and you feel like, at least in my seat, sometimes I feel like we're kind of in like a boat by ourselves, and it's like, man, is there anybody else? Like, can we talk with and like that's doing this?
Yeah.
And being at that conference and hearing other churches and other church leaders that they're pursuing that same thing was really encouraging.
Powerful. Yeah.
I think you brought up a good point in that there's church plants that start with this as part of their DNA, and then there's churches like ours where, in many ways, this is missiological because we're reflecting our community.
Yeah.
And so I think they're slightly different journeys in some ways, and so that's what's, that's what I think is unique in some ways about IBC.
Yeah.
All right, here's a fun question. I actually didn't put it on the list because we have a few minutes here.
What?
Surprise.
This person asked, have you ever been to a water park? And if so, which one was your favorite water park?
So in New Jersey, we had this thing. I think there is a documentary on it called Action Park. It was like the most dangerous thing. That's why they did a documentary. This place was ridiculous. Like people
I didn't know
would
you
get
had water
hurt.
parks in New Jersey.
Of course, we have everything. It's like paradise.
We have everything.
Yes,
We have,
anything
of course,
you can think of.
we have everything.
Mountains?
I love it.
Yeah, we have mountains. We've got everything. What do you want? We got it. So yeah, we had this action park. We have this water park called Action Park that there's like a documentary on Netflix about it because it was so dangerous. So it was Action Park and Six Flags that we had. That would be our versions of water parks. So I like water parks as a kid. I don't so much like. I haven't been to a water park in years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, growing up here in this area, there was Wet and Wild and Whitewater, two different ones.
Yeah.
Competition with each other. One of those, I think, totally went away. The other one went on to become whatever the name of it is now that's associated with Six Flags. What's it called? I don't even know.
I don't know what it's called, but I know what
you
you're
know what I'm
talking
talking about.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I haven't been in years and would be very happy
Not to
go again.
Yeah,
So,
the older I get, the more out on them I am. Does it affect it that I'm like not in shape for a water park? Yeah, but still, there's just a part of it. I'm
Your
like,
kids aren't at the age where they're asking for that yet.
it's also kind of gross.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say it's just
That's-
dirty.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of pee in there.
Yeah, I'm not doing
This
that.
person also asked at the end, water slides or lazy rivers, if you had to pick one.
Well, if you're on a lazy river, it like there's a beverage in hand. You can't
Yeah.
do that on a slide.
You have
But
the floats with the cup holders on them.
Yeah, I'd prefer to be lazy on an actual river. At the lazy river at the water park
Is not a
where
thing,
there's
yeah.
a high concentration of pee.
Okay. Thanks for submitting your questions. And so at the end of each episode, we try to do some banter, have some fun with it, and I try to throw some random questions at Barry and Sissy. This one, I'd say, isn't as like funny, but what is your favorite class that you have taken and why?
do you have to say Dr. Jones?
Yeah.
I did not
do.
take
You do.
Dr.
You kinda
Jones, so
have to
I
do
don't
it.
feel
Yeah.
obliged.
Just say that. You're just trying to expose my nerdiness yet again, which I somehow managed to do myself.
We
pretty
did
well.
tell him it has to be a class you've taken, not
Not
taught.
that you taught,
You
yeah.
can't say you can't use that. And
So I got to take a course during my PhD at the University of Notre Dame. And I had the opportunity to take, and it was so interesting because it was a course on the history of the Reformation, but at a Catholic university with one of the top Reformation scholars in the world who was visiting professor that summer. But I'm in this class, and it's relatively small graduate level course. And there's a couple of us that are evangelicals, and there was like 3 nuns and 2 priests. I mean, it was so
interesting.
interesting
Yeah.
to engage this conversation with these people, with this world-class scholar at the University of Notre Dame. So that was definitely a highlight.
That's awesome.
I've got multiple
Yeah,
other
you
kinds of
must.
highlights,
Yeah.
but that one really stands out as pretty amazing.
Mine was not anywhere near something like that. It was actually back in high school. It was
whoa,
yeah, I went all the
it's
way
like
back.
chemistry.
Yes, it wasn't. I was not good at chemistry. It was terrible at chemistry. Anything
Blowing
science.
stuff
yeah.
up
No,
was
it was
kinda
like
fun.
history. And it was junior year history. And I'll tell you why, because I still remember my teacher, Doug Bennington. He was awesome because it was the first time I really feel like I had freedom to think for myself and to question things. And I never my nature is I don't want to be told what to do. Like, let me give it to me and then let me think about it and let's like talk about it and give me space to question it. And that's what he let me do. And also help me see how we can learn. I'm a big history buff, so just how we can look at history, learn from it, and how it affects how we live today. So that's just that sticks out to me as someone who really helped me learn.
Yeah.
I do remember when Sissy took my class, and that
you took Barry. You didn't say
no,
Barry.
she didn't have to
said I
say
didn't have
that. Come on now. She
This
couldn't.
is awesome.
Yeah, no, that would be just way too much
It's
kissing
my
up to the boss.
second favorite class.
But so that class and one other really stand out as in 15 years teaching, like really, really unique, really special.
Yeah, we had some good people.
And
in there.
and it's interesting because I had current IBC staff members in both of those two very, very memorable classes.
Yeah,
So,
that was a great class.
That's cool. Yeah, I want to go the beneficial route. I think the cheap route of this would be like PE or like, like one of those random electives in undergrad of like Frisbee 101. And I'll say angelology and demonology.
Wow.
Dr. Harrell at
Oh, that's good.
DTS.
Yeah.
When I think about DTS, I think about times in class. I think about that class a lot. And just the eye-opening part of that, of spiritual warfare and both sides of the stories, some of the projects.
How did he get out of answering the angels and free will?
That's right.
question?
That's your
Golly,
favorite
if
class.
That's your
You should be
favorite
all
class.
in
You were
that.
you were ready to
Yeah.
like tee off on that subject,
no.
so I'm not going to interrupt that. But just some of the books we read. I mean, we had to like sign a waiver to like watch a video, and it's like anytime you got to sign a waiver to watch a
watch a
video in a
video,
class, I'm
it's
all here for it. I'm like, let's do this.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that class, and
No.
yeah, I won't. There's some different things in seminary though that I loved taking some strategic planning stuff with Dr. Malfers, and there's some things that Yarborough did in class before he's president now, right?
Yeah.
And his kind of story through the Bible stuff that I'll never forget that. And although the Acts 1:8 stuff, I don't have to do that again.
Yeah.
100. But anyway, all right, that's awesome. I'm still baffled that you took Barry and.
It was one of my favorite classes in seminary. I just went all the way back.
No, she
favorite.
In
couldn't,
life.
because nobody would, believe it if she said
Yeah.
it, just because.
It was a close second or a tie.
It was a great class. Even content I do today is from that class.
You didn't take class with
Yep.
me, and I still hold it against you. So
It was Sissy's second favorite.
If I have anything good to say in life, it's probably something I learned from him.
It's something from Barry.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening to another week of Form. We'll be back next week.